He wants to have some guarantees of money and free passage and freedom from prosecution, none of which I think the rebels are prepared to give him. And frankly, Nizar, Shaheen, I don't know if there is a country anywhere in the world who would take him in. Do you think?
I don't think so. Maybe Venezuela, maybe Zimbabwe. That's the only two countries they can receive him at this point.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, Zimbabwe, who'd want to go there these days? And Venezuela, my goodness. What's your view, you know, in the big picture? You were born and raised in Israel. You are an Israeli citizen as well as an Arab Christian. You're an Arab leader. You are broadcasting to millions of people every day by way of satellite TV in that area. You're traveling there every month. What's your perspective on the situation?
Well, I think this is a very unique perspective and a unique situation, what's happening in the Middle East at this time. Well, two things. One, I believe God is the sovereign Lord, and He is in control over everything, even in the Middle East. Secondly, you know, we have to look at the whole situation prophetically, because I believe very strongly, every time you read in the prophets, in the Old Testament, even somehow you can find it in the book of Revelation, between the lines, the Roman Empire is not just talking about Europe or somewhere in Europe. It's always talking about Israel and the surrounding nations around Israel. So that's what's happening these days. But another unique perspective that maybe we don't realize, in many of these countries, they have been persecuting the Christians. And the voice of the Christians was unheard. And at some point, you know, God is proving Himself that He is in control, and He hears the cries of the minority and the people who are facing injustice. So we see the whole turmoil. Another unique perspective is the change. We can see that the young generation, they are looking for a change. That means they are dissatisfied with the system, especially the government. And interestingly, a lot of these people in the Muslim countries are dissatisfied with their own religions. Therefore, they are looking for something, for a change. And that's why we see these demonstrations, especially in a technological age. They see what's going on around the world, and they look at their governments, what's going on. We are intelligent people, we are smart, and why we are so suppressed? So they are seeking that change, and that's why we see the revolts.
Did you see this coming, Nizar? I mean, you're still a young man yourself, and you have a lot of young people who look to you for spiritual leadership. I mean, I've been with you in Cana, or even in Tiberias, and young people flock to come and see you. Did you have a sense that this might be coming, that they were getting more and more dissatisfied with kind of autocratic governmental structures?
Well, in a sense, yes. At some point, we always think about the future. But I never thought and even dreamt it will happen in such like a speed or a fast time like what we are seeing these days. I mean, look at Egypt. I mean, Egypt is a very powerful country. To see the whole system crumbling within 3 weeks, the entire system falling down, I think there is something more into that. There is a change.
Now, speaking of Egypt, you're an Israeli and you're concerned about Israel. It's a very small country. What possible ramifications are there to the fact that Mubarak is no longer in power? He was, after Sadat, before him, quite conciliatory towards Israel, quite pro-Israel in many ways, and provided a bit of a buffer against the radical Muslim groups that wanted to absolutely just destroy everything. What's your sense of the future for Israel?
Well, I think my feeling and my sense, Israel, they like the change, especially if we are looking to a democratic countries to have a free speech and free expression. I think this is something good. But when there is a vacuum in power, that's what really make people concerned. I mean, just think if the radical Islam will take over the government of Egypt. First of all, they will cancel the peace treaty with Israel. And secondly, I believe the persecution of Christians will continue on to persecute the Christians in Egypt. And keep in mind, Sinai Desert is demilitarized zone. So that means, and Egypt is a powerful country. They have a strong air force. They have more than 400 F-16 and tanks and on. Just think about one of these radical Muslims could take F-16. It's a matter of 1 minute to go up and down to commit suicide. Yeah. And the list goes on and on. What about, Gaza? Maybe they will bring more weapons into Hamas in Gaza, and that would be like on the doorstep, almost inside of Israel. So the list goes on and on. So that's why we are praying that a democratic country, true change will happen in Egypt.
Now, is there quite a tension between the Palestinian Authority and who are in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza? Are they enemies?
Well, in a sense, yes, when you look at the politics of the land, because there are two different ideologies. And, the Palestinians want peace, and at the same time, they want just peace, not just any peace. Now, Hamas is going to the extreme, to eradicate Israel. And so that's why the two ideologies are totally different. But interestingly, the people inside of Palestine or the Palestinian territory, they're also seeking a change. And I believe this will also touch our land and our area because people, they're seeking change. I mean, people are smart. They look at the situation and you cannot just bombard them with information or negative information, and the reality on the ground is different. So people will revolt at some point.
What was the reaction a few weeks ago to the release of the Palestine Papers? When it was suddenly revealed that the Palestinian Authority were prepared to make a number of compromises with the State of Israel in order to achieve peace. What I was reading was that this was undermining the credibility of the Palestinian Authority. Was this the case?
Well, it does undermine the credibility of the Palestinians, especially, we are talking about all the Palestinians. I mean, the different factions within the Palestinian territory. But we don't know exactly the information because it's kind of debated whether it's true or false. But when we talk about just peace, I mean, to bring sense of freedom to the people, to the expression of their will and to choose and to decide, and also to live peacefully with Israel.
Would most Palestinians, in your view, be in favor of the two-state solution rather than the one-state solution?
Yeah, I believe in two-state solution. Otherwise, the next prime minister will be a Palestinian prime minister, because keep in mind, we have 1,700,000 inside of Israel, and we have 4.2 million in Gaza and the West Bank. So it's almost more Palestinians at this point than Israelis.
And how do the Israeli Palestinians feel about the West Bank and Gaza Palestinians when it comes to the future condition of Israel?